All right, welcome to the last recorded lecture of this series, client-side error checking. And just like most of the other ones that we've talked about with JavaScript, conceptually, pretty simple. Implementing it, not so simple. And especially with this one, because every single error check is going to be different. There is no standard procedure. It has everything to do with what type of feedback you want to give to the user and what conditions are you expecting. Okay, so with that said, let's get into some of these concepts. They're going to be, yeah, obviously type concepts. But with that said, I'm going to give you a couple examples of how I accomplish some of them and some of the rules of thumbs and rules to live by when we start talking about client-side error checking. All right, so what is it? First of all, it is used to prevent errors in our system. So programming is absolute. It's a yes or a no. We, as humans, are notoriously imprecise and make errors all the time. We have to account for that, right? We are designing systems for humans. We are not making humans adapt to us, adapt to the system. And if you talk to a lot of programmers, that's exactly how they think. They think that you need to read the manual. And do you not understand what this key does, right? Or do you not understand what this button does? Regardless of the fact if they understand it or not, people still make mistakes, regardless of how well they understand it. All right? Two types of errors. There's client-side mistakes, client errors, and then programming mistakes and state errors. So when we're talking about client mistakes, we're talking about a misclick here, we didn't mean to send it here, just a general error on the part of the user, and we need to be able to have our system account for that, or at least be able to fix those errors relatively easily if they did happen. Programming mistakes. This is going to be something along the lines of a logic error, or we didn't expect this particular state or this type of variable. Those type of mistakes that we can account for a little bit more easily, but you still need to account for them. So one easy example is if you're going to make an API call and that server doesn't respond with anything. Well, we need to have some sort of system that goes, hey, we didn't get anything back. There was an error with our system, right? You're going to have some sort of error check like that. And again, it comes back to feedback to the user. It doesn't matter if the code doesn't execute or not, but it does matter if the user knows if it's working or not, right? It's a feedback thing. So rule of thumb, if possible, prevent the error before it happens. This is a form of error checking. So if you only allow for one time slot to be used, well, make it where you can only select one time slot. Why have that ability to select multiple time slots if you know that you're only going to select one? Doesn't make any sense. So set your user up for success. Don't make them think, right? That is a very big concept in HCI. Do not make the user think. Do not have extra mental load for no reason. Okay? State errors. We've already talked about it a little bit. If there's something that happened with the system itself, make sure you have a way of maintaining that program based on that state error. Client errors. So, here's some common ones. Inputs are not filled in. When we start talking about the more cynical users among us, not filling in emails or socials or any other personal PII, personally identifiable information, PII, people are not going to fill out that information if they don't have to. So if you need that information, you need to make sure that you check to see that it's actually being filled out, okay? leaving unsaved data. So a couple ways around this: you can autosave, or you can save on exit. You have to choose what version of this to account for, but this is a common one. All right, deleting data unintentionally. So a couple ways around this as well. Almost everything has, are you sure you want to delete this? Now, because everything uses that message, it's not enough to have, yes, I confirm that I do want to delete this, because most people are not actually reading it. And if they're trying to delete something that they didn't mean to delete, that means they're under the condition or under the thought pattern that I did want to delete this. And then there's going to be a different environmental trigger that goes, oh, I actually did need that thing that I deleted, because here's the other thing that I intended to delete and it's still there. So what did I actually delete? Okay, so you still need a way of recovering data, even if you have the, yes, I confirmed that I want to delete this thing. Okay. All right, accidental button presses, all right, happens, okay? Make sure you have a way of correcting for that or accounting for that, or at the very minimum, forgiveness, right? Be able to get back to the state that you were if an accidental button press happens, misunderstanding the developer intent. So again, this comes back to, don't make your user conform to the system. Don't do that. Unless you have a life-critical system, which then you can make an argument for, but even then, not a great argument. So, okay, technical and server errors. So this is going to be the realm of, I made an API call, the server responded with nothing, what do I do now? Okay, so based on whatever number or status you get back from the server, you can do something with it. So if it's 404, okay, I didn't find that page. Hey, tell the user that whatever you're asking for, whatever button they clicked, whatever page they're looking for, we don't have it, we didn't find it, something went wrong. Something along those lines. A server error, if you get a 500 error, then you know that you have a server problem. Then you can tell the user that as well. So something like when Facebook went down a few weeks ago, I know of a student in Albany that called her mom and went, I need a new phone because Facebook doesn't work. So I was like, that is one of the scenarios where if you put a message up, more than likely they're going to read it. Even if they don't read it, and you're still going to be okay. But hey, Facebook servers are down, please try again later type of idea. So that's one way of handling that problem. So you don't have daughters calling mothers about new phones when it has nothing to do with the phone itself. It has everything to do with the server error. Okay, I already talked about this a little bit, not allowing the error to happen in the first place. It is the gold standard. All right, so this is essentially guiding the user to the right place without actually letting them make the mistake first, where they feel like they have to redo work. So overall, this is the gold standard. All right. So most of you and students in the past have always struggled with the idea of, well, okay, so how do I prevent a problem? So if we do this, if I show you this video, okay, so I have these times already taken. So if I come over here to appointment, and notice that I have these times taken, and I come up to the list here, and notice that all the times that were taken before, they don't show up in this list. That is a way of preventing an error to occur, because most people are going to look at this and go, oh, this is an open slot. They're actually not going to sit there and think about it. And even if you gray it out, why are you graying it out? Because that means there's just more search time for the user. So that's a user experience that is not as good. So why are you doing that? All right. So now if we come up to schedule, and again, I'm showing the same thing twice, but we had to make sure that it's working in every scenario, that okay, cool, we can't schedule in those times. And then if you notice that every time I clicked on a different button, the green highlight moved, that's because we only needed one time slot. So if you only need one time slot and you already know what times are taken, why display them? And then if you're only selecting one time slot, only allow the user to select one time slot. This prevents them from having the error in the first place. Okay? So this is what that code looks like, getting that toggle for the green button to move around. So toggle selection, if it's customer or time, we're going to remove anything that was selected, and then we're going to reevaluate that button. So if it contains selected, we're going to remove selected, and then if selected, oh, sorry, backwards logic. If contains selected equals false, we're going to add selected. If contains selected equals true, we're going to remove selected. That was it. All right, so we just changed the state of that object. And now based on that state, we know which time slot we actually need. So this is going to be a little bit more of a traditional example of error checking. So here are a bunch of inputs. I'm not going to fill out any of it. And then we're going to go back up and go, hey, you're missing all of these things. And notice that username, because this was a prototype when I was making this, username's not in there. Right? So you can get code that works for a good chunk of things, but if you have a logic error, sometimes it shows up like this, where username isn't showing up as an error. Okay, so now I'm going to fill out the rest of this. I'm going to create the profile, and now it works. Okay? Okay, so here's a small chunk of that. If we're checking numbers, so the phone number itself, this is the type of logic that you're going to need. So is the value empty or not? Yes or no? If it's not empty, okay, now we got to make sure that there's no invalid characters for a phone number. So obviously, if we're looking for a phone number, anything that's invalid is going to be a letter. So, okay, look for all the letters. All right? Then bring back invalid chars. If invalid chars does not equal null, well, then we have an error in phone number. So you mistype something, or you mistaken the input field, something along those lines. Okay? And this is how you would check for phone numbers. All right? Checking for technical errors. So this was a bug that I found with my software a while ago. And notice if I come back up here, everything is still active. I never changed the DOM. So if I come back down and hit create appointment again, slot was taken. So instead of changing the DOM where I had to re-render it every time that something like this happened, I decided to go with a different error message. So that is checking for a technical error. That time slot was taken. I got an error back from the server. And there's that code example for the time slot taken. All right, so that was it. And that was the last recorded lecture of this series. If you're an Upper State student, we spend a lot of time building out software in class, just so you have a good idea of what it takes to, one, to be successful, but two, the process of going, I think it's this, let's test it, did it work or not as intended? If yes, continue on with life. If no, go back and reevaluate, fix it, and then just continuously do that cycle. And that's how you create software. All right. With that said, error checking is one of those things where it's difficult to get good at, because you have to understand what the user is trying to do, and you have to account for many scenarios all at once. It's one of the harder things to do. However, we have to get good at it because that's how you make good software, right? Error checking and allowing users to fix the error, or the gold standard of fixing the error before it even happens, is what we're trying to achieve, right? We are starting to get to the point where just having the software that works isn't good enough. People are expecting a user experience where they don't have to think that hard. They don't want to think. It's always been a human trait where it's just, I'm going to learn as little as possible to be functionable. We have to account for that, all right? So with that said, if you're an Alfred State student, we're going to be using all of these things more than once. We're going to be using it quite a bit, so you don't have to worry about it too much if you don't understand it. With that, if you're not an Alfred State student, make sure you're building your own projects. Practice these. You're going to have to practice. That's the only way you're going to get good at it. And that's it. That's the last recorded lecture series of Intro to Web here at Alfred State. So I will see you in class if you're an Alfred State student. Thanks for sticking with me.